What's up, guys? This is Ryu, and this video I will discuss some of the things that I personally learned while watching the Dazed and Thoorin Reflections interview. And what I'm going to have on the screen here is my notes. You guys can kind of see as I was listening, I was just kind of writing things down. That'll help keep me a little bit more structured and on point as we move through the video. And then what you'll see on the left is the site I had a video that I put out yesterday. If you guys can take a look, change the format based on some of your feedback. I think it would kind of look something like this with recent posts and then maybe some recent match results and a list of all the posts on the side. Something like that. Just wanted to leave that out there. But coming back to the main purpose of the video, I think it's really valuable. And I know that the video the interview was like 2 hours long. It was a long piece of content to consume. I love listening to stuff like that. I spend a lot of time in the car, commuting and stuff for work, so I usually just fire something like that up. So it's no big deal for me. But I know there's probably a lot of people that didn't watch it, and I think there was a lot of great information there and things that I learned about the scene, some things I learned about the high level in-game stuff, and I wanted to just document what those were. I think there was a couple recurring themes. This first one that I've got where NA continues to be very aim-based, they touched on that like 10 different times, and probably because Thorn was poking a little bit, right? He likes to jab at North American Counter-Strike. But Dave's made a point that I thought was really interesting that I wrote down a little bit further on my list here, and the point was that it's easier to aim than it is to think, or the way I like to phrase it is it's easier to aim than to brain, and that's the reason why we see really stupid plays from really great aimers very, very commonly in North America. Dave says he's continuing to see that as he helps coach some teams in North America now as he's watching it. I think we're all pretty familiar with that, but I thought it was an interesting way to think about it is that people are taking the easy way out by having great aim but not really thinking, and that the thinking and the mental aspect is substantially harder. It's also harder to develop. One of the things Days had mentioned is as he was kind of finishing his run prior to his ban, he was switching his in-game leadership style. Historically, he had been a very, here's the default, we're going to work on map control for a certain area of the map, and then off of that, we'll either execute or mid-game adjust, based on his call. So for example, I think he was talking maybe Dust 2, their default had players in different, kind of scattered out from long all the way to lower B. They would get cat control, and then off of cat control, they would execute or fall back or whatever. But that was the style he had been operating with. And towards the end of his run, he had been more of I would call it random, a little less predictable 4-1 split kind of thing, where he would say, the example he had used was on Cash, he would send 4 people outside of bomb site B and just post Hiko as a lurk at A. And as teams in Europe, I guess, were starting to abuse his default setups, when they would try to abuse what had been prior just one person outside of bomb site B, they'd walk in a 4, and then off of that they'd key and execute. So they would basically post 4, do 4-1 splits, and then they would execute based on openings that they were given in the round. I thought that was pretty interesting because the structure Days had always called with had a lot of kind of process. It was very pragmatic. It was step 1, step 2, step 3. And the 4-1 is a little bit more, I think, fitting of North America, where it's kind of random. You don't really random in a sense of unpredictable, which is a good thing. But it's if you look at Na'Vi, they play the older way that Dazed would have played. They've got great default. They hold map control on T side, and then they take map control, wait till the clock goes down. They've got great information, and then they execute. That is the model he was moving away from. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And then Thorin made the point that a good in-game leader has to adapt the way he calls and the style of the play of his team based on the players that he has. You can't have super detailed, really intellectual executes if every player in your team is kind of the dumb aimer and not so much the guy that's doing a lot of the thinking. I thought that was a really good point that was worth kind of emphasis. And I don't think that they made this point, but it was something that I kind of caught where you can win a lot by doing the wrong things. I think I touched on this in another video. you can make the wrong decision and you can make stupid peaks and you can do things wrong and still come out and win. And it seems like very very common examples, the guy with the great aim, right? He might make the stupidest peak in the world instead of playing the bomb timer when the bomb's down, and he hits the shot and he wins, but he made the wrong decision. He did the wrong thing. Uh, that kind of felt like it kept coming up a lot in the descriptions of how they were winning rounds, etc. It seemed like they were winning doing the wrong things. And then Days also mentioned when he first joined um, a team that had previously been led by, I think he said it was a Dren. I can't remember which roster it was, but they were dominating in scrims, but he felt like they were doing things wrong, and he had a hard time saying to his team like, "Hey guys, we need to change this. This isn't good Counter Strike," because they were winning. So I thought that was really interesting that there was a dynamic there, and it's tough, right? And that was the point he was making is when you're blowing teams out, it's really hard to be like, God, this is terrible Counter Strike because you're winning, but maybe you're doing the wrong things. And another thing I noticed throughout the whole video really kept bugging me is that Daze lost his train of thought like 400 times. Thorn would ask a question, Daze would start to talk, and then he'd be like, I don't, what was the question? I don't know if that answered the question. Like he was like spiraling, his train of thought was just this like completely nebulous cloud, and he was just out there, and then like Thorn would have to like reach out and grab him and pull him back down. Happened a lot. I thought it was really interesting. Um, what other points do I think here? Freakazoid private message Days after Days put out that C9 video. I thought that's great. I think that's great for North American fans of, especially fans of Cloud9, that someone like Freakazoid, who's known as kind of the great raw aim, but maybe not the thinker, would have reached out to Dazed and get some feedback and maybe get some help and hey, appreciate that kind of thing. The fact that he took the initiative to message him to me is a great sign of where Freakazoid's head is at and the attitude that he's bringing to the game. Thought that was great. Um, I thought that the way that they described how the top teams at the time, when it was complexity and iBuyPower, they were like, I don't know. I don't know if saying high school drama is appropriate or not, but it was like instead of screaming each other and practicing and kind of like this metal sharpening that metal, they were like they would rage and then they'd play super gimmicky and then it would just be like the way Dave's described it was like a shit show with shotguns coming out, people running around jump shooting. Um, it's really sad and disappointing to me that that is one of the things that's holding back North America, or was holding back North America, is the teams couldn't just find a way to say like, hey, let's have some pride in our continent and make each other better, and let's just go and when we play against the Euros, we'll be as prepared as we can be. And instead, they chose to be kind of stupid and petty about things. That really bugged me. Another thing I learned was how reliable Skadoodle apparently is. And I think there was a good and the bad in the way that this was described. Days basically said that Skadoodle always did his job. Like he would have one thing to do and he did it every time. The problem and the downside to me is the way that it was described. It sounded like Dazed had to pick him up and put him somewhere and tell him what his job was every round. And that can be really taxing on an in-game leader. Now Skadoodle's on Cloud9. He's been definitely successful there as they're starting to kind of separate themselves from the pack in at least in the ESEA, ESL Pro League. I just think that that's going to be really, really wearing, and the IGL he has in Sean Garris today needs to know that you can trust him to do his job. You might just have to tell him what his job is every round. I was surprised at how open Dazed was with Jordan Nothing Gilbert's drug habits and how he believes, and everyone that he's talked to, that given the amount of marijuana Jordan smokes, he's holding himself back as a player, and that a lot of people have the belief that he could have been the best player in the world by a large margin if it weren't for some of his recreational activities. I've heard the same thing. I've heard it for years now. Uh, Thorn kind of alluded to the fact that maybe he stopped and he doesn't smoke anymore. I don't know. But if you're an up and coming player, say no to drugs, kids. You'll go further in the world of Counter-Strike as a result. So I thought that was it was kind of like awkward. I didn't know how much he was going to talk about that, and he just kind of laid it out there. So um, maybe maybe some drama fall out from that. I don't know. I don't think Jordan's even acknowledged it at all. He might not even know. Swag was put in a really interesting light. Something else that I learned is the way that Days described him is that Swag would just like wake up like a different person every day. That he would just say like, I don't want to play with Dazed and Steel anymore. Then they cut them, and he would wake up and be like, I don't want to play. I want to play with my friends now, and he would like threaten to quit. And it was like he made it sound like Swag was just really like almost multiple personalities. Like he was just a different guy on a different day, and it was like you didn't know which swag you were getting. He was hard to kind of rein in game, and then out of the game, he was just doing his own thing. I don't want to play with this guy. I want to cut that guy. I want to add these people, etc. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Swag didn't take too well to the interview. He actually had some stuff to say on Twitter. He had some screenshots about the throwing thing. So there was a lot of fallout from that. I just thought that was a really, really interesting insight into who Brax is as a person, as a player, from the eyes of the person that was kind of leading him on a team. But, this kind of goes back to the team's bickering, this high school drama bullet point. Daze said that Hiko didn't want to play with him for the longest time because when they had played together in the past, him and Dazed and TCK were, as Dazed described it, absolutely ruthless and making a ton of gay jokes about Hiko. He said like it was nonstop. The second that he would join Mumble or Ventrilo or whatever it was, they would just like go to town on him. And that, I mean, that's high school shit, man. I hope I'm sure the days would has matured past that. I'm hoping a lot of the community has, but don't fall into the trap of sitting there and doing that. If you're gonna make jokes, they should be in good fun. Everybody should be laughing. They shouldn't be insulting or annoying to the point that someone's like, I never want to play with that player again, because that's just a bit that's just a bit over the top, and it's not needed. Um, when it came to the throwing for skins conversation, Days described it as they kind of didn't really think of the repercussions outside of maybe we'll get banned from CEVO, and they just made like a super quick decision. I've heard that that may not be entirely accurate, and I won't go into a ton of detail there, but it came from a extremely reliable source. Um, given the amount of dishonesty that we've seen from Dazed on stream about that particular topic, I, I I'm not inclined to believe every single word that he said. Um, I don't really want to dive too far into that. I just thought that it was interesting the way it was described as like, yeah, it was kind of like real quick. Deborn came to me and we said, hey, that's a good idea. And that was like, oh, we decided. I think it was a little bit different than the way it was um, described on the interview. Dave said the best results that they had, and this one bothered me, man. They said the best results that they had overseas on LAN. It said the thing that they changed is they spent a lot of time going through and watching the demos of, the other teams and being prepared for a little bit of the tendencies and things that they did. I I was blown away that they hadn't been doing this while competing for majors. Like this just blew my mind that we're gonna go to a smaller event like a Gfinity or I forget what the other one was, and we'll prepare for that one. But going to these $250,000 prize pot events that are Valve majors, they hadn't been doing that already. Like that just blows my mind. And that can be the fault of the in-game leader. Some of these things people are boot camping for. Like I don't see a way that I could be accepting of the lack of preparation and saying that like, hey, yeah, when we actually put in the work and watched the tape, the results were great. Like, what the hell were you doing before, and why were you just doing that now? That's just absolutely astounding to me. And it was just like, yeah, so we really watched the tape prior to that one. That seemed to make a big difference. It's like, did that light bulb not go off before? Was it one of those like stupid new swirly light bulbs that take 15 minutes to get to its full brightness? Because that should be simple things that it's not surprising to anyone is required to compete at the top level against European teams. I don't know. I'll move on. Thoorin asked about what Daze thought the best kind of team would look like, and Daze said he only believes there's really 6 to 8 Tier 1 players in North America, and that current contracts are keeping them separated from each other. He said there's just like 2 per team in the top teams, and that they're probably unlikely to play together because of that for a very long time. He then gave a couple different lineups where he said it would be like Hiko, Skadoodle, Shroud, Sean Garris, and then either Semphis or Tarek based on how Sean was calling. When they talked a little bit about Sean, it sounded like Days had a lot of respect for his preparation and stuff outside the game, but when it came to actually leading the team in the game, he felt like Sean always took a back seat to whoever else would kind of talk over him, essentially. That Sean would say, "We're going to do this," and then Jordan or Semphis or someone would say, "Well, I don't think maybe we should do this instead." And Sean would just kind of pause. And at that time, it was like everything was already falling apart. Thought that was interesting. It's really hard as an IGL if you have loud, aggressive personalities that are maybe louder or more aggressive than your own to keep those guys in check and to rein them in. And it sounded like Sean continues to struggle with that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. They talked a little bit about Adren, and it sounded like there's a lot of respect there for Adren from Dazed. He appreciates him as a player, as a mind of the game. And he basically said he has a high-pitched voice that makes panicked calls, and that he thinks that really hurts the teams on land. But that he's just noticed that Adren loses a lot of the 1v1s on land, and that he's done it for a few years now. He doesn't know what causes it. He's not like an onliner. He's got a great history on land. It's just that against those better ops, he's not coming up with the frags, and it's obviously a problem for Liquid and Adren right now. And then the last thing that I had notes on is that Days is now coaching for LG. He said maybe 10 hours a week, which sounds a little low to me, but I guess that's probably within spec. He didn't really sound too thrilled about it. I guess he's just doing it to stay somewhat in touch and relevant in the game and, help out the teams as much as he can. But he definitely didn't sound like it was something he wanted to do long term or had a lot of interest in doing, moving forward, which I thought was pretty interesting. So that's it. Those are all the points that I made on all the notes that I had taken and things that I had learned. So appreciate you guys watching. And feedback, as always, is welcome. And I will see you guys next time.